Who are you? And why are you here? Are you a Tory? Are you a Pennite? Are you a loyalist? Did the Watchers send you here? The Watchers sent you here, then you are a patriot. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Hannah Swetland, beloved wife of Luke Swetland. Perhaps you passed my farm up the Great Road. About 2 miles up the road, wonderful fruit trees. You recognize the orchard that my husband tends daily. It's well renowned in the whole valley. People come from all over for his wonderful apples. Or maybe your horse was needed to be reshoed. My son Belding has his smithy there. He is a wonderful, wonderful blacksmith. Now, my husband and I lived in Connecticut, but we heard of the plains of Wyoming and how beautiful it was. And we came here in 1769 and settled this land. But little did we know what would befall us, the trials, the tribulation, and the sorrow that we would endure while living here. It began with the Pennsylvanians. They did not want us here. They referred to us as Yankees. You cannot be here. We had every right to this land. The Susquehanna Company purchased it from the Indians. They surveyed it. We had a grant, a charter from King Charles. We were not going to leave this land. This land was ours. We built our homes. We cleared the fields. Fighting ensued for many years. We would take possession. Many of our men were sent to prison in Easton, including my husband and Nathan Dennison. But we would not give up. We loved this land. Something else was on the horizon, something far more important for both the Pennamites and the Yankees, and that was freedom. And that came knocking on our door, and that was on the horizon. So they laid down their arms. We wanted freedom from tyranny and from taxation from King George. So, like many able-bodied men here in Wyoming, my husband Luke joined Washington's army and fought with Washington's army. In the winter of 1777, they ended up in Valley Forge. Now that was a terrible winter, hard for them to endure. Many men died from illness, exposure, not enough blankets, no shoes, no shelter. My husband became very ill, and by the grace of God, General Washington allowed him to come home. And he came home, and I nursed him as best as I could. He was very, very weak. It took him a long time to get his strength back. But it didn't end there. We knew it was coming. Every day we wondered when it would be at our doorstep, when this war would come here. And it came in July of that year. Several men were killed north of us, and their bodies were brought back down to Pittston in the Jenkins Cemetery. And that was the sounding alarm here in the valley. Our enemy had come at last. Now, Luke, weak as he was able to help the women and children as we hid into the fort for protection in the 44th. The soldiers marched out on July 3rd with the drum beating, the fife and drum, and we heard them go in the distance. And then the musket fire began, and the battle ensued. We could hear it in the distance. We could hear the war whoop of the Indian, and then silence. We heard nothing. And then nothing but the war whoop and the screaming and the desperation to go back to the fort for those who survived. And those that survived came back in the fort. And of course, the next day, Colonel Dennison, he signed the capitulation. We left. The Indians wanted the spoils of war. Our homes were burned. With the clothes on our back, I took my children for safety back to Connecticut to our families. There we stayed and waited for word. And in August, word came about my husband. He stayed here with Captain Spaulding's company. He was captured by the Indians. Down at Nanticoke Falls was the only grist mill left to grind their grain so they could make bread here. As they alighted from their canoe, they were taken captive by the Indians. He was taken north, he and Mr. Blanchard. Mr. Blanchard was never seen or heard from again. Now my husband survived. He survived the gauntlet, running the gauntlet 3 times. He survived the beatings, the clubbing, the switching. And they respected him for that. So he was entered into their family. They clothed him. They treated him well. They fed him. He was adopted by an older woman who had lost her son. But he was never granted his freedom. He was always watched by the Indians and never allowed to stray. Then word came that an army was going to come and defeat the Indians once and for all for what they did in Wyoming and what they did in Cherry Valley, New York. No more was the frontier going to be a threat for the settlers. And the army did come one day to his village. All the Indians had left, but my husband was very smart. He hid in a privy. 3 days' food he took with him. And when he finally came out the privy, when he heard the army come up, and he greeted them with open arms, only to be beaten again and abused. They thought he was a Tory. My husband, who fought for the Patriots, who gave up so much, they thought he was a Tory until Mr. Ransom from Wyoming recognized him and said, "You are Luke Swetland. We thought you dead." And glorious, the reunion when he came back to Wyoming and made his way back to our family here in Connecticut. But the story doesn't end there. We loved Wyoming. We loved this land. We always wanted to come back, but we were not ready because of the Indian raids, and the Yankee-Pennamite War was still raging on. So in 1784, we decided to go to our lands in Mahoopany, a little north from here. But it kept calling. Wyoming kept calling. My husband wanted to come back, and my dear son Belding and his wife Sally and their 12 children wanted to come back here too. So we did. We came back, we rebuilt, and of course my husband, his dream of having an orchard came true. He tended his trees, and they're glorious now. Now, I left this earth in 1809. I did not see them grow to their full capacity. They were doing well when I left this earth. And he joined me 9 years later. So tonight I have been given a wonderful, granted to me, a wonderful, able to tell my story. And I hope that the next, if you walk through the graveyard, that there is another spirit who's been given this privilege to be able to tell their story as well. So as you continue your journey, hopefully you will meet another spirit who was given the gift of being able to tell their story from the Watcher. So be gone and enjoy.